So I'm going to continue reading chapter 2. I'm starting on page 62 today if you want to follow. He doesn't fit in with the other spoons because he's alive, Princess. He's alive, interrupted Bodkin. And all the other warriors ignore me, Wish carried on. You and this spoon are my only two friends. If I lose the spoon, well, that just leaves you. Well, technically speaking, I can't be your friend either because you are a princess and I am a servant, and those are the rules, explained Bodkin. In which case, if I lose the spoon, I'll be losing my only friend, said Wish. Okay, Wish. Bodkin was so upset that he forgot to call her princess. It was time for some stern words. I like you. I know you mean well. But let's face it, the reason is you haven't got any friends is because you're a bit weird. And weird doesn't go down well in the warrior fort. You need to try and be normal. And the first step of being normal is getting rid of the enchanted spoon. Wish tried one last desperate argument. But my mother has enchanted objects herself, said Wish. Well, what about this then? To Bodkin's horror, Wish drew a large ornamental sword from her scrapbrand. It wasn't like an ordinary sword. It had very dirty, old-fashioned hilt, and even beneath the greenish grime that covered it, you could see that it was beautifully designed, with interweaving leaves and mistletoe and the leaves of other sacred trees twisting all over it. On one side of the blade, there was carved these words of fancy curled old-fashioned scripts. Once there were witches. And when Wish turned the blade over, the other side was engraved with, "But I killed them." Where did you get that sword? Said Bodkin in awed tones. Well, it's quite odd actually. I found it, lying in the maid courtyard yesterday afternoon, and it didn't seem to belong to anyone, so I picked it up. Didn't you hear the announcement at breakfast this morning about how a very valuable sword had gone missing from your mother's dungeon? Gasped Bodkin. And didn't you guess this sword? It might be this. Didn't you wonder if picking up things that don't belong to you might actually be stealing? Yeah, I did, admitted Wish, stroking the sword longingly. But I was just going to hang on to it for a while longer, pretending it was mine. I'm so ordinary and it's so special, and it would be lovely to own something so special, don't you think? No, I don't think. Thinking is dangerous. The defenders of the royal household are turning the fort upside down looking for this sword, and you have stolen it, goggled Bodkin. I haven't stolen it. I've borrowed it. I was just about to give it back, but then you frightened the spoon, and I thought we might need something special to protect us if we were going into the bad woods on our own, and I have a very strong feeling that this might be an enchanted sword, ended Wish triumphantly. Even my mother has enchanted objects, which means they must be all right. Your scary mother isn't keeping that sword as a pet, cried Bodkin, waving his long, thin arms around. You don't keep pets in dungeons. She's locked it up in the dungeons to keep safe. Wish looked at the sword and slightly worried, as if it was only just occurring to her. Oh, yeah. Now I come to think of it, you could be right about that. It did seem kind of out of character for my mother. She doesn't really like anything magic, does she? Where have you been living for the past 13 years? Cried Bodkin. There are whopping great signs all over the fort that you can't have missed them. Your mother loathes magic. She hates magic. She has sworn never to rest until she is rid of the entire forest of any magic at all. Wish furrowed her brow. Yeah, I have to say, I don't really understand that. Surely, just because some magic is bad, doesn't mean all magic is bad. You're not supposed to understand, screeched Bodkin. You're a warrior. You're not supposed to be asking questions. It's very, very simple. You're just supposed to be obeying the warrior rules. Wish suddenly looked dejected. The spoon, now standing on top of her head, drooped. Bother. You're right, said Wish sadly. I've messed up again, haven't I? You most certainly have, said Bodkin. And then he added hurriedly, Your Highness. In the excitement in the situation, he had forgotten the warrior rules about how to correctly address royalty. And this was the problem with Wish. Whenever you spent any time with her, you found yourself breaking the rules without even realising it. If my mother ever finds out about this, she's going to be hopping mad, isn't she? Said Wish, even sadder still. Absolutely hopping, agreed Bodkin, giving a little shiver of thought of it. I wish I was normal, like everyone else, said Wish. What can I do to put everything right again? Bodkin gave a sigh of relief, for it looked like at last the princess was finally seeing sense. Okay, don't be sad. All is not lost, he said, giving Wish a little pat on her shoulder to cheer her up. You didn't mean to do anything wrong, but you need to realise that this spoon is wild, and right now, take this sword back to the fort immediately, and you have to stop doing things like this and start behaving like a normal warrior princess. And hang on. What was that? There was a sudden noise above them, like the snapping of a twig or something brushing up against it. They'd been so busy arguing that they'd actually forgotten they were not in the safety of the Iron Warrior Fort and about to tuck into a splendid dinner, for warriors were very keen on their food. They were actually all alone in the dark, bad woods after dark, and for the first time they realised they were being watched. I mentioned, did I not, at the beginning of this chapter, that something bad was watching them, quiet and dangerous, up in the treetops. A cold feeling came over the back of Wish's neck, where the hairs prickled up like quills of a hedgehog. She looked all around at the black, silent trees and their branches twisted and gnarled like the knobbliest of goblins' fingers. She looked up. She could not see anything, only perhaps a certain darkening and shimmering thickening of the air above them, as if the air was choked on something awful, as indeed it was, and the coldness radiating out of the heat of the shiny density was coldness you'd never felt before. Colder than the coldest depth of the Northern Ocean, colder than icicles, colder than polar caps, colder than death itself. The freezing mist of the wild woods, ancient past crept under Wish's armour and sank like death into her bones. Was it Wish's imagination, or did the air above them seem to be grinning? Wish put on her helmet. The spoon stood up straight on top of Wish's head and sniffed the air around them. Suddenly he went rigid, as if a sense of something terrible and divided into Wish's armour to hide. Run, pony, run! Squealed Wish, and the exhausted little pony started violently and broke into a shambling, terrified, wobbling gallop. Anybody watching would have thought that they were mad, because it looked like they were running away from nothing at all. But there was definitely something very odd going on. Wish and Bodkin could see nothing above them except for the dark night sky, stars and trees, but something about the way the tree branches were moving suggested that an invisible presence was hurtling against them. And the air rushing above them was so cold that it burned the top of Wish's forehead, and the pony galloped faster and faster. The wind blowing directly behind them began to make an odd noise, like no wind Wish had ever heard before. Now you see, Bodkin, aren't you glad that I brought this sword with me? I thought we might need it, panted Wish, trying not to panic. Glad? Glad? We could be sitting right now in front of our dinner safely in the dining room in the Warrior Fort, and I think that today it was going to be deer burgers, which is my favourite, and this pony isn't going in the wrong direction, flapped Bodkin. This fort is the other But whatever it was chasing them, didn't want to go back to the fort. It was chasing them further and further and further into the bad woods. "Does anyone know we're out here?" cried Bodkin, who had drawn his bow and was shooting desperate arrows up, even though it was a terrible shot and he couldn't see what he was shooting at. "Will they send out search parties for us?" "I'm afraid not," said Wish, squinting upwards, trying to work out what was pursuing them, or not till the morning anyway. "I told Mother I was going to bed early with a headache." "Oh, brilliant," said Bodkin, "brilliant. As if it happens, I can feel a bit of a headache coming on myself. Don't worry, Princess. You mustn't worry. I'm here, I'll protect you and..." Wish shook the spoon, as whatever it was following them. She may have been somewhat weird warrior princess, but she certainly had courage. "You'd better not follow us, whatever you are," shouted Wish at the terrifying screeching nothingness. "For we are armed with an enchanted spoon." "The sword, Princess," murmured Bodkin through white lips. "The sword. The sound sounds scarier when you say a sword." "And a sword," shouted Wish, waving her sword in her right hand and the spoon in her left. "A sword is so dangerous it was locked in my mother's dungeon." But that, if anything, seemed to encourage whatever was following them even more, for the wind above them gave a hungry whine and rushed after them even faster. "Never fear, Princess," cried Bodkin, shaking so much with anxiety he could barely load his bow. "This is a bad situation, but I will save you. For personal assistant bodyguard to the Princess, I have been training for the most advanced arts of bodyguarding." Unfortunately, Bodkin discovered in those desperate moments that he had terrible disadvantage as a potential bodyguard. He had a medical condition that caused him to fall asleep in situations of extreme danger. He had barely said the last words of that brave speech before collapsing on the princess's shoulder and snoring loudly. "Bodkin!" shrieked the princess. "What are you doing?" "Bodkin!" shrieked Wish. "Wake up now!" Bodkin woke up with a start, mumbling, "What? Where? How?" "Bad woods," panted the princess. "Being chased. Something terrible. Advanced arts? Bodyguarding?" Oh yes, I've been carefully training for exactly these sorts of life or death emergencies," cried Bodkin, fitting another arrow into his bow and unfortunately falling asleep again at the moment of aiming. So he tips forward and accidentally shot the poor pony in his hindquarters. The pony squealed, protesting as the arrow grazed its bottom, and then they ran into the wild desperation through the pitch-dark forest. Wish's heart was beating fast like a rabbit's, and she didn't even notice when the bramble shredded her clothes to ribbons and tore long, painful scratches into her legs. The pony came upon an ice-cold stream and forced his way through the briars and splashed down into it. Through the cold water burned them all like fire, in hope that whatever was following would be put off by the scent. The pony clambered out of the other side and ran through the darkness. "Oh, murmuring mistletoe," thought Wish in terror. "I should never have done this. Magic is banned for a reason. Warriors are not allowed out after dark for a reason. Iron Warrior Fort is built for a reason." She could feel her heart beating so fast it felt like at any moment it would break out of her chest. "Faster, faster," urged Wish, so choked with panic she could barely breathe. The pony galloped into a sudden clearing of the forest, and the whining of the strange wind had an edge to it now, like the painful screech of a chalk on a stone. The sound grew louder and building as if to attack, louder and louder, and the noise grew. Screech! There was an extraordinary noise, as if the air itself was being torn apart like a giant piece of paper. Terrified, Wish turned her face upwards to confront the attack as she drew her sword. There was a shout from a human voice somewhere behind her, and suddenly everything happened very quickly. I'm going to stop just at the start of chapter 3.